I'm taking on Tom from Golden Goal Fantasy Football as we give our predictions for FPL Players Prices for the 23-24 season. In this video we'll be predicting prices for the top 15 scoring forwards from the previous FPL season, but firstly we're going to discuss Evan Ferguson. At just 18 years old, Ferguson looks to have a great future ahead of him. He already showed us what he's capable of at times during the 22-23 season. One thing I'm interested to see is whether De Zerbi decides to give him more game time this season, and if Brighton are able to repeat their form from last year, Ferguson could potentially end the season on 15 to 20 goals. 4.5 million in FPL was too low for him in my opinion, and I think he's going to rejoin the game priced at 6 million. Over to you, Tom.
I think Evan Ferguson had a breakout season in my opinion. Only 4.5 million I think he was last season. Obviously that's underpriced for what he is, but I think next season his minutes are still going to be shared with Danny Welbeck, and I feel like that's probably going to be reflected in his FPL price too. I see him 5.5, 6 million. I'm going to say FPL are going to be nice about Ferguson, and I'm going to say 5.5 million. He definitely had a good end to his season, and I think we're going to see him at least starting next season as Forest's first choice striker, obviously if pre-season goes well for him. I think his price though, just because there's a bit of rotation there, I feel like that's going to be reflected in his price. I'm going to say 6 million.
Looking back on the figures, I've only just realised how impressive Awani ended the season. In the last 4 game weeks of the campaign, he scored 6 goals, helping Forest to pick up 8 crucial points, which ultimately secured their place in the Premier League. Forest signed so many new players at the start of the season, and Awani was continually in and out of the side due to rotation and injury. He dropped 0.4 million in value throughout the season, and because Forest aren't that desirable of a team to target in FPL, I expect him to return priced at 5.5 million. Alexander Isak was one player who definitely added a new dimension to Newcastle in the offensive department, and it helped them to end the season as the 5th top scoring side in the division with 68 goals. Isak looked to be a great fantasy option at times, playing 90 minutes up front and on penalties, but towards the tail end of the season, he was moved out onto the wing, and Callum Wilson was in the spotlight when it came to returning FPL points. I personally think we see a marginal price rise this season for Isak from 7 to 7.5 million.
Now, I didn't quite realise how many skills Alexander Isak had in his locker before he signed for Newcastle. Yeah, I was a little bit sort of underwhelmed with him at the start of the season, and obviously he got injured, even though his stats were really good. I don't know, I was just sort of underwhelmed by him, and they stuck him out on the left towards the end of the season. I feel he was a bit hard done by, really. If he was playing centre forward, he probably would have scored as many goals as Callum Wilson did. I think it's just the case that, Callum Wilson's not really a left-sided player, so Isak just had to stick it out on the left, to be honest. I think he's going to be one of the first choice players in that Newcastle team next season. Just not sure how FPL are going to price him. I think it could be 7.5, 8 million. I'm going to be nice. I'm going to say he's going to be priced at 7.5 million. Darwin Núñez was, his underlying numbers at least last season were absolutely unbelievable. One of the best strikers in the league for expected goals. Unfortunately though, he just wasn't getting in the Liverpool team, and I think we're going to see that reflected in his price. I'm going to go 9 million.
Darwin Núñez was nothing short of a frustrating own for those of us who decided to go there last season in FPL, with the Liverpool forward constantly under-delivering on his stats. Not only that, but Klopp never really established a solid front three, especially with injuries to his forward players, so Darwin constantly ended up getting surprise benchings throughout the season. 9 million in FPL was far too high of a price, especially with the talent Liverpool have up front, and for that reason I think Darwin's price has to drop to at least 7.5 million in order for us to consider him as an option next season. In the 22-23 season, Kai Havertz only returned a total of 7 goals and 1 assist, which you'd have to say is pretty poor considering he was given the most minutes of any player in that forward spot for Chelsea. Of course, the incredibly poor season for the Blues wasn't down to Havertz alone, and for that reason I think it's difficult to stick a price on their players in FPL for this year. The arrival of Mauricio Pochettino is likely to shake things up a bit, and I think Chelsea will become a much better side, but I honestly have no idea how they're going to line up when the season gets underway. Overall, I think 7 million is probably a sensible price tag for Havertz. Tom, what's your thoughts?
Kai Havertz. When Benzema left Real Madrid, apparently he was the top target they were trying to get in to replace him, which I just couldn't understand. I feel like he's a really good player, but it's just not like the centre forward for Chelsea. Obviously, he's not a centre forward, but Chelsea have been sticking him there, and I feel he's a bit hard done by because that's not necessarily his best position. I think he's going to play regularly for Chelsea again next year, though, especially if Mason Mount leaves. In terms of his FPL price, though, I just don't see him being any higher than 8 million. I think 8 million is a very fair price for Kai Havertz. Julian Alvarez, what an unbelievable youngster he is. I think the world is his oyster in terms of footballing potential. Unfortunately, though, as an FPL asset, unless you get like concrete news or a good feeling that Haaland's not going to play for a series of games, he's not really a pickable player. Obviously, towards the end of this season, he was, given that, Man City had the league title wrapped up and it was pretty obvious that Haaland and a few others were going to be benched and he was going to get some game time. I think starting next season, not many people are going to have him. I think his price is going to go up a little bit, but again, I don't see it rocketing and I don't see him as an obvious option. I think 7 million is going to be a very fair price for Alvarez.
Despite playing limited minutes this season, Alvarez still managed to return a very respectable 9 goals and 3 assists in the Premier League. Even though he picked up 4 double-digit hauls in FPL across the campaign, Alvarez was never really an option for us fantasy managers. That was until the end of the season, when City had all but wrapped up the league title and he was given a run of 5 starts by Pep. I personally don't think Alvarez has done anything to warrant a price rise or price drop for the upcoming season, so with that in mind, I expect his FPL price to remain at 6.5 million. So few options emerged as set and forget forwards last season in FPL. At one point, Alexander Mitrovic appeared to be a great asset, but injuries, suspension and 4 missed penalties really impacted his value for us across the season. Fulham got off to a great start in the 22-23 campaign, but as the season progressed, their form dropped off, and a lot of that coincided with Mitrovic's absence from the side. He started last season priced at 6.5 million, which I actually think is a little bit too low for a player of Mitrovic's quality. I think 7 million is a sensible amount for him to return to the game at.
I think injuries in bands sort of scuppered Mitrovic's season and his form, to be honest, because I think he got injured before the World Cup, didn't he? Like broke his foot in a Serbia game. He was absolutely unbelievable. Not quite on a level with the likes of Nunez. Well, actually, no, he was on a level with Kane in terms of underlying numbers. He was doing that well. Just unfortunately, he can't take penalties. I hope he remains on them and just learns over the pre-season how to take a proper penalty. For me, I think he's a really good option, and I'm hoping that FPL price is nice and low so he is a good option coming into next season, because I think he's the kind of player I'm looking at picking. For me, I feel like he's going to be 7 to 7.5 million. I'm going to say 7.5 million. Brennan Johnson, I think he did better than I expected him to in the Premier League. Coming up from the Championship, didn't really know what to expect, and I think he proved himself as a solid Premier League option this season. And those that did have him in FPL, I think they had quite a nice differential, to be honest, because he did return them some points. Next season, I feel like he's still going to be priced fairly low, but again, penalty taker for Forest probably makes him slightly higher than a Awoniyi that we mentioned previously. I'm going to say 6.5 million.
Brennan Johnson finished the campaign on 8 goals and 5 assists, and he was one of the more regular contributors when it came to goals for Nottingham Forest. Even though he was a part of a massive squad that saw plenty of rotation, Johnson himself only missed 5 games across the season, and the majority of them were due to an injury he picked up towards the end of the year. Not only is he the penalty taker for Forest, but he also has something about him that's able to influence matches through open play, and I think we're going to see him priced similarly to other attackers around his calibre. My guess is 6 million. Coming into the 22-23 FPL season, Gabriel Jesus was owned by over 50% of managers, so it was a massive risk to go against him. I decided I'd do just that, and apart from one game week where he returned 19 points against Leicester, he never really harmed my rank. Jesus became a pivotal player in Arsenal's success, especially in the first half of the season, but his hard work wasn't reflected in his FPL returns, and instead the Arsenal trio of midfielders emerged as the much better options to select. Having said that, I still think that Jesus will remain at 8 million this year in FPL. Interested to hear your thoughts, Tom.
Now, what a signing Jesus was for Arsenal. And to be honest, I don't think he exceeded my expectations, really. I knew what Arsenal were getting in that player, and how involved he could get in the build-up play. And just how good of an all-round player he was. Unfortunately though, his underlying numbers were a lot better than the returns that he actually got. I feel like there were a lot more goals in him than he actually managed to get last season. Obviously he was a good option at the start of the season, etc. I don't know, he's not the penalty taker for Arsenal. It's just difficult to see where he's going to be priced. I'm going to say 9 million. 9 million seems a fair price for Jesus next season. I think it's fair to say Solanke outperformed my expectations, at least, of him last season, compared to how he did at least in the Premier League last time he was there. In his FPL price, though, I'm kind of hoping they keep him low because I feel like we need some budget striker options. I know he's not exactly a punt, but, to make him cheap enough that people would actually consider starting with him in their team. 5.5 to 6 million, I think, is where he's going to be priced. I hope he's going to be priced. I'm going to say 6 million.
I think that many people expected Bournemouth to finish rock bottom of the table coming into the start of last season, so to see Dominic Solanke finish 7th in terms of forwards in FPL, I thought was a pretty big achievement. 6 goals and 10 assists for the season is a very respectable tally, especially as Solanke missed out on half a dozen games in the first half of the campaign. I'm not sure what to expect of Bournemouth going into next season, but I think they might have enough to survive another year in the Premier League. Solanke for me should be a 6 million priced forward. Brentford had a fantastic season, performing exceptionally throughout, and in the end just about missing out on a European spot. The FPL returns trickled along gradually for Brian Mbeumo, who ended the season on 9 goals and 9 assists. However, interestingly, he returned 30 points across his final 3 fixtures, which were coincidentally the 3 matches that Ivan Toney missed out on due to his ban. I don't expect Mbeumo to be priced that highly, but I'm going to predict he comes back at 6.5 million, which could be an absolute bargain if he were to become Brentford's main man for goals.
Mbeumo, I think that's how you say it. Without Toney, he's going to be the main man for Brentford, at least starting off next season. When Toney hasn't been on the pitch, he's been the penalty taker for Brentford. So similarly to, the likes of Solanke and Mitrovic, he's a player I'm genuinely eyeing up for next season. And I know Toney's going to be out, but I don't think that's going to be reflected in Mbeumo's FPL price. I think as a result, he's going to stay relatively low. I've said Solanke's going to be 6. I think Mbeumo's going to be 6 million too. I'm going to say 6 million. Now, if you watch my channel at all this season, you'll know how much Callum Wilson has screwed me over. Yeah, I've been absolutely robbed on multiple occasions by either the game crashing before the deadline or going for Isak instead. Yeah, feeling a little bit robbed on Wilson. And just in terms of his FPL price, I think his injury record is going to be factored into it. Obviously, starting with him next season, I think he's a good option. He's obviously a great striker, but his injury record is absolutely appalling. I'm going to say 8 million for Callum Wilson.
Wilson scored a record-breaking 8 goals in the month of April, and from game week 29 he was on fire, returning 5 double-digit hauls between then and the end of the season. You tend to know what you're getting from Wilson. When he plays, he gives everything, always finds himself in goal-scoring positions, and obviously takes penalties. I do worry a bit for him though, due to his poor injury record and the risk of rotation with Isak. Overall, I think he's had a very good season though, and in my opinion it's enough for FPL to bump up his price by 0.5 million to 8 million. What a brilliant second half of the season Ollie Watkins had, who finished the campaign on 15 goals and 8 assists. Aston Villa had a real resurgence under Unai Emery in 2023, and it saw them ascend from near the bottom of the table to finishing in a European spot. One noticeable thing that happened towards the end of the FPL season was the uncertainty and unreliability of forwards in the game. But Watkins played 90 minutes as Villa's main striker every week, and he was the player they looked to for goals. Similarly to Wilson, I think we see Watkins given a price rise to 8 million. Let's see what Tom thinks.
Now, what a purple patch Ollie Watkins had during the season. I think it was a purple patch, so I don't think he's, a goal a game kind of striker. Although he definitely is patchy and can have those runs. I think though, just given, I feel like that big run he had was a purple patch. I don't feel like his price is going to go up too much. I feel similar to Wilson really. I feel like 8 million is a fair price for Ollie Watkins. Now, we all know that Toney is going to obviously miss the start of the season. I think it's January when he comes back. Unfortunately though, I feel like FPL have to price him up as someone that's going to start the season because no one's going to pick him to begin with, but come in January, February time, Ivan Toney's 4.5 million because FPL don't think anyone's going to pick him. He's going to break the game, so he's going to have to be priced sensibly. I feel like 8.5 million compared to how he played last season. I feel like, that was an 8.5 million pound season in FPL, so I'm going to say that.
Many of us ignored Ivan Toney for the majority of the 22-23 season, mainly due to his looming ban from the FA, and also because he was at risk of suspension for numerous weeks earlier in the campaign. However, despite those factors, the Brentford forward continued to score FPL points week after week, and by the end of the season he'd returned a very impressive 20 goals. I've heard people say that because he's banned till January, Toney should rejoin FPL at a massively reduced price. I actually disagree and think he should remain at 7.5 million and force people to have to make a choice on him when he returns. Harry Kane was outstanding last season, scoring 30 goals in what was a very mediocre Spurs side. Due to the impact Haaland made in his first few months at City, and City's sheer dominance in the league and cup competitions, Kane's performances always seemed to be overlooked, which was interesting because he only ended the season just 9 points behind Haaland in FPL. As for his price, I'd personally like to see the game really force us to think about squeezing all the top tier premium assets into our teams, and for that reason I think Kane should come back at 12.5 million.
Harry Kane, unfortunately didn't have him at the final game week of last season when he absolutely went off. I owned Harry Kane at sort of the wrong times this season. Just owned him when everyone else had him really. I feel like he was for a period of time at least, he was just banging in the goals and being a bit of a differential. Next season, I mean, it remains to be seen obviously if he's still at Spurs. Real Madrid looking at him at the moment, although I'm not sure he's going to go to Madrid. I've got a feeling, family orientated man, he's going to stay in England, hopefully sign for Man United. Depends really where he's playing as to how he's priced. Although I feel like he's a £12 million player at the moment in FPL. I want FPL to price Erling Haaland as something astronomical because I feel like you need to have, a decision to make as to whether you pick him in your team. Although that's just not the way that FPL go with their player pricing. I would personally make him something like 14, 15 million to, make players really think if they want a player that expensive in their team. I don't think, like I said, FPL are going to do that though. 13 million, I feel like, is how Haaland's going to be priced.
It was a record-breaking season for Erling Haaland, who ended the campaign with 36 goals and 9 assists in the Premier League. Although Haaland's clearly a world-class striker, I did question at times this season whether his addition actually had a positive or negative impact on the way City play. But after helping them to complete the treble, you can't really argue with his impact on the squad. Because City won the Champions League, Haaland is going to want to break more records in the Premier League next season, so I expect him to come back firing on all cylinders. 14.5 million would be a record price for an FPL player, but I think that's a reasonable price for the Norwegian. A massive thanks to Tom for joining me on today's video. If you haven't yet already, please go over and subscribe to the Golden Goal Fantasy Football YouTube channel. Tom makes plenty of quality content, and I'm sure he's got loads in store for you for the upcoming FPL season. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out our other price prediction videos. Once they're uploaded, they'll be available on the screen now. Thanks as always for watching guys, and I'll see you again soon.